Thanks for joining us. So welcome to this webinar, Governance 365 webinar with Helen Van Orton. AI, friend, foe or free for all. So as I said, in terms of the questions, you can use Q&A or the chat. Just put your question in the chat. I'll keep an eye on them and read them out as we go. Before I get started, I just want to share what Governance 365 does. So we work with owners, boards and executive teams to help you understand your blind spots, to help you grow throughout not only the innovative technology we've got, but also our hands-on approach to support you. As an example, I was working with a group of directors and executives and asked them, how aligned are you on your strategic priorities? They all said very aligned. And when I asked each of them to share with me their top 2 or 3 strategic priorities, I got about 30 different priorities. So they thought they were aligned, but not in practice. And then we helped them really align on those 2 or 3 areas that are going to add the most value. One of the areas we help you understand is what does good governance look like in the area of digital and IT. So we've previously covered areas like cybersecurity. More and more people are asking, what about AI? How should we be using it strategically? What are the risks? And too often boards are taking a wait and see approach and then being left behind. So Helen Van Orton is a seasoned board director, entrepreneur and AI expert with extensive boardroom experience, chairing multiple boards, including Answer Services Ltd, and serving on boards including the Co-operative Bank and Centrix Group Ltd. As the owner of Directorly, a consulting business that helps boards and executive teams optimize their boardroom performance, Helen specializes in enhancing AI governance and decision making, offering bespoke training to boards and executive teams, and is also available for keynote speeches and executive coaching. Helen also delivers Board Pro's popular AI masterclass and continues to be a thought leader in using AI to drive boardroom innovation and operational efficiency. So welcome, Helen. Fantastic to have you on the webinar.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
So you've worked across many boards in many industries. When you look at the current moment with AI, what excites you most? And secondly, what keeps you awake at night when it comes to how boards are or aren't approaching AI?
I love that question. I think this is a really rare moment for us. AI is one of those technologies. It's a bit like the discovery of fire or the start of the internet or electricity. It is an area where there is absolutely massive potential, but also massive risk. And I think that boards that jump in and seize the opportunity and companies that jump in and seize the opportunity have got an incredible opportunity ahead of them. They can really shape the future, but they need to safeguard it at the same time. And I think as governors, leaders, our job is to really make sure that we are leading strategically in this space and making sure that we are seizing that opportunity. So if I just give a couple of examples. So for me, AI is about taking a lot of the work that is currently mundane, hard work, repetitive, and actually giving that over to the machines and freeing humans up to do what they're best at. It's that creativity, it's that value add, it's particularly with our customer experience, actually being able to jump in and help customers in a more meaningful way whilst AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the background. It's that profoundly human part of it. It's a massive leadership advantage. So for organizations where they are using AI, they can supercharge their success. They can become much faster, much more efficient. They can cut costs. They can become more productive. So that massive opportunity to seize. And if you think about IKEA, for example, took their customer service agents and they retrained them, 8,500 people to use AI, and they've put $1.5 billion on their bottom line. So it's like a huge opportunity if you lean into it. It's obviously a big company, and a small New Zealand SME might not be looking at it in the same way. But as somebody who runs my own businesses, I use AI in every aspect of my business. So it's a massive opportunity. And from a governance perspective, it's a real inflection point. So it's somewhere that we need to, as governors, be going, how do we get in early? You mentioned earlier you've done cyber presentations. A lot of us know we got into governing cyber a little bit too late, and then we're constantly playing catch up. With boards, if we take that governance opportunity with AI now, you're laying the foundations and you're going to actually be able to grasp the opportunity rather than it being your Kodak moment. Other side of the coin, what keeps me awake at night? A lot of this is, so KPMG has just released their quarterly governance survey, and in that it's saying that globally 1/3 of boards still don't have AI even on their agenda. That is a massive, massive oversight and risk. And on top of that, 2/3 of boards are saying they don't know enough about AI. And because I live and breathe and work in this field all the time, I kind of have an assumption that everyone else knows all of this stuff. But actually, there's a real gap, and particularly at that governance level, of people not being able to actually understand what's going on, understand what the opportunity is, and really importantly, know how to lead it as an exec or govern it in the boardroom. The second part of that is shadow AI. So shadow AI, and I know we'll probably talk about this in a bit more detail later, but it is 50% of employees are using AI every single day. Has your organization even got an AI policy in place? And if they have, do your people know what that AI policy actually looks like? And if you get it wrong, that trust and reputational risk is really real. I put a LinkedIn post out a couple of weeks ago. So there's the infamous case of the US law firm a couple of years ago that cited cases wrongly and made all the global headlines. And you'd think that they'd learned, but actually no. And big case in the US literally a couple of weeks ago. Again, they cited a whole load of cases incorrectly. The judge spotted it before it even went into the courtroom, and now they're facing sanctions from the court, massive media commentary, and really massive reputational damage for them. So it's not just the sanctions and the bits that they've got wrong, but it's that massive reputational damage that can come from your AI not being governed properly. So that risk and trust and reputation is really, really real.
Wow.
So those are some things that keep me awake at night. But also the
Fair few.
opportunity, like it's super exciting, but it's also, it's risk, and we need to be stepping in early to make sure that we're getting it right.
Okay, all right. I want to take a point at this junction just to launch a few questions on a poll, just to see where people are on this call in terms of AI. So the first question, which is now live on the poll, is who on your board stroke leadership team could confidently explain how AI is being used in the organisation right now? Second question is, has your board or executive formally discussed the risks and benefits of AI this year? And thirdly, what best describes your attitude to AI in your organisation? So yeah, we'll just wait for a few minutes to see how things are tracking there. So first question, at least one of us can confidently explain AI, how it's been used in the organisation is about 50%. 30% or 20, around 30% is no one, but we should. So that's nearly a third. And another third is we're figuring it out. So second question, has your board formally discussed the risks? 62% briefly, but not deeply. 23% yes, it's part of our strategic agenda. That's great. And 13% not at all. So nearly 3/4 either not at all or briefly, but not deeply. And the last question, what best describes your attitude? So split between 44% excited, but we're experimenting, and 53% curious but cautious, and then 3% avoiding it until we have to. Yeah, I like that. Who's that one person? Yeah, all right, good. So there's what's your thoughts on that, Helen? Is that a surprise to you in terms of...
It's not a surprise. So I think that the amount of boards that aren't actually thinking about it or using it, actually quite a good number there who actually said that they could, they had somebody on their board who could explain AI. But it's at least one of us being able to explain AI, great. But if you've got 55%, so more than half of people there saying nobody, or we're figuring it out, that should be a really big red flag to you in your organization. So yeah, I guess the point of today is to say you need to start thinking about it. You need to start thinking, how does this fit not just into your organization, where are you going to deploy it, how are you going to seize the opportunity, but on the counter to that, how are you going to put the frameworks in place? I was talking to a chief people officer a couple of weeks ago, And she was saying, we've spent the last 2 years going, this is our AI policy, this is our guardrails, our guidelines, this is what you can and can't do. And she said, and we're now moving to, how do we unleash this? How do we actually say to people within that framework, how do you seize the opportunity, learn how you can work more effectively? And so I think it's really important that boards very, very quickly get to the point where they have got those basics in place, and then they can move on to how do we drive this as a game changer for our organization. Because honestly, I look at so many businesses now who are using AI, and it is such a competitive advantage for them. And if you're not using it and your competitors are, then it's going to be your Kodak moment, because they can do things so much faster, better, quicker, easier. I mean, I use AI in pretty much every aspect of both the 2 businesses that I run, but also in my governance as a thought partner, as a challenger, as someone to just help really make me think more differently and more deeply on things. So I spend probably way too many hours a day on AI, but it's literally, it's like my partner in crime, but with a lot of guidelines and rules around how to use it safely and what to believe that when it comes up with things. But it's really important to start using it and leveraging it, but doing it in the right way.
Yeah, and you said that a third of boards, I think it was at PwC or the report you talked about, don't have AI on the agenda.
Yeah.
And I think your previous, there was another communication that I think you've seen from you that it's less than that in some places. So that could be global, maybe different in New Zealand. What's holding boards back, and what's your advice to directors to start closing the gap between ambition and action? Because I think people see the potential. It's just what's gonna drive them to take some action, and what's that fear that's there.
Look, I think there's a couple of blind spots. I think AI literacy is definitely one of them. There's a lot of people thinking it's something, it doesn't really matter to me. And if we look at the balance of a lot of boards, you have got generally older people who are not necessarily digital natives, and are therefore not exposed to ChatGPT. I mean, I wrote a LinkedIn article the other week about my 89-year-old dad who uses ChatGPT literally for everything, whether it's analysing his medical reports or it's helping him plan post-hospital diets or whatever. So that's a really practical day-to-day usage. But as leaders, we need to get familiar with the tools. And as part of the training that I do, I'll often say you just need to spend 10 minutes a day using it to just learn what its capability is, whether you want to write a poem or you want to do some research on something or you want to get a different perspective on something you're thinking about. Most directors and exec leaders aren't necessarily in the place where they're using it to create basic content, but you can use it to rewrite your KPIs for your CEO, or you can, if you're getting a job advert written for somebody, you can get it to do a first draft of the job advert based on what you're doing, or an analysis. Like in one of my businesses, we just chuck all of our data analytics into it and we just say, okay, give us what are the gaps we're missing? Where's the opportunity that we're not seeing? What other products should we be going into that will, generate us more revenue? Or where's the cross-sell gap that we've got? Whatever it is, we can use that AI for pretty much everything that we need to do, as well as for all of our marketing analytics and our competitor trend analysis. So there's a really low digital literacy, but there's also a really, unfortunately, misplaced delegation. So boards are going, this is a technical issue. This is the IT department. They need to just think about this and work on this. Actually, as leaders, we need to be thinking, what's the strategic opportunity for this? Where does this sit on the wider board agenda? So we are looking at that strategic opportunity. We're putting it into our risk management. We'll talk probably a bit more about risk management in a bit, but making sure that we've got that board strategy and that we haven't just delegated it to someone, our CIO, is really, really important.
Yeah. And what if boards will say, well, I'm worried about information getting out there, so if I put the analytics or if I put our strategy and ask it to do something, then that's out there and I don't know. I'm worried about that. So what would you say to them?
I would 100% agree with you about being very careful. So if you haven't got a paid model, don't put anything into it. If you, for example, are using Microsoft Copilot and it's an organizational environment and you've got all of the Microsoft privacy and security sitting around it, then they've got access to all of your documents anyway. You think everything you've attached to a Gmail or anything else. So you've got a secure environment in that space, and that's when you can really start to leverage AI to look at something. I know one example, excuse me, of an organization that actually puts their board papers into the different GPTs to say, tell me what questions my board would ask me on this pack to help them prepare better for their board meetings. Would definitely not advocate that unless you really, really know what you're doing. And you need to make sure you've got all of the settings around not training the model, et cetera, in place. But there is definitely an opportunity for you to use AI safely within a secure environment. And if you're not leveraging it in that space, you are falling further and further behind.
Okay. There's a question here, it's an interesting one. I'm with a university, there's a big challenge for us where students use AI to write their thesis. I don't think we can totally eliminate control of this. Should universities take a different approach to testing students? I'm not sure that's an AI question, but
It's a great question.
Thesis and lean more towards exams, going back to when I was at school maybe. But yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really good question. I guess part of the question is what do you want your students to learn? Do you want them to learn how to be able to leverage the technology that's going to be sitting side by side for them for the rest of their lives, and actually to be able to leverage that in a really great way? I mean, we all have heard of hallucinations, and we'll talk about that in terms of one of the risks of AI in a little bit. But AI does hallucinate. Like, fantastic example in the last couple of weeks. So the Chicago Sun-Times published its summer reading list, obviously the wrong side of the world, so they're going into summer now, and they published their summer reading list of all these amazing books that people could read whilst they were away on their summer holidays. Unfortunately, the list had been generated with AI, and so some of the authors were real, but the books weren't. And they did the whole story of this is what's in the book, and this is what it's all about, and it's this lovely story. But actually, the book doesn't exist. AI had made up the whole lot. So it's just a really great example of a hallucination, right? And if you know what you're looking for, if you are a regular AI user, you can very quickly spot with grammar, words, commas that have double dashes, a whole load of stuff that you can very quickly see. But going back to that question, treat your students how to use AI well and effectively and in a way that doesn't hallucinate. Teach them to question what it is that they are learning and what AI is producing, because actually one of the things in the AI world is human in the loop, and it's actually moved over the last 3 or 4 months from human in the loop to expert in the loop. So it's the AI can do a whole load of basic stuff, and it might make some things up and it will get things wrong, and it's always trying to please. But the human expertise will add that extra value, and that's what you're looking for. And I was reading an article the other day which was talking about brain rust. And brain rust is when you start relying too heavily on your AI and just let it do everything. And so if your students are getting AI to write their whole thesis, they're heading towards brain rust, and that's definitely not a good outcome. But teaching them to use AI in a way that enhances what they're doing and keeping that human in the loop, it's going to add value. I can remember spending many hours in a dusty library at uni when you couldn't even take the books out of the library because they were too popular, and sitting there for hours, going through things. If you can get AI to summarize that, and then you can add your thought leadership on top of it, I think that's a great space to be in.
All right. So you've talked about ChatGPT, which everyone know about.
Yep.
You've talked about Microsoft Copilot. What other tools are out there, and how should people be using them? Because I've seen people put a very basic question into ChatGPT, and after a coffee with you, my questions became about a page long. So just, what tips and tricks should, if I'm a director or if I'm a CEO or I'm on an executive team, how do I know what's out there? Because there's so many tools. Where do I go to look for the right things? What's the 3 or 4 that you'd say, if you're not using these, you're not getting the most out of it? And what's the best way to use some of these? So some of the little tips and tricks.
Yeah. So for me, I would say my go-to is ChatGPT. I have a paid subscription. I have it trained not to send my information back to the model. Within that, I've probably got 20 custom GPTs. So each one of those is created with a different tone of voice, depending on what business I'm using it for. If I'm writing as myself, it's trained as a salesperson, a marketing person, a blog creation person, a customer experience concierge. So, if we're getting customer queries in. So I've got all of these different ones that are designed So whatever I need to do, I can just pop it in and it will answer the question. But I've also got one for each of my boards, again, very generically, just saying it's a board in this sector in New Zealand. So you're thinking about the right legislation and frameworks. And that custom GPT's role is to challenge my thinking. So I will read my board packs the first time and just read them. And then the second time I go through them, I'll go, yeah, I thought that question, but what else should I be thinking around that space? So I'll just pop the high level, generic, what's something everybody does all the time, a transformation program. We're doing a transformation program in technology or people or whatever it is. Think about some of the risks that I might not have thought about in this environment. And it will just come out with some things. And most of the time I've got 60-70% of them. And then there'll be the odd black hat one that I'm like, oh, that's a really helpful way for me to think about it and consider that framing. So that's one of the ways to use ChatGPT. But as you said, how you talk to ChatGPT and how you prompt it is a skill. I do a lot of training on prompt engineering, which is the weird technical term they've come up for it. Really, it's can you speak English to a machine that speaks English or whatever language back to you? And making sure you're prompting really well. In terms of other tools that I use all the time, Gamma, if you are doing any sort of presentations, is literally, I was talking to someone who'd just done their master's, probably a good link back to that university comment. And she had been weeks and weeks and weeks of research, or months probably, putting all the stuff together. And I said, well, what was the topic? And she read it to me and I went, actually, I'm going to get you to dictate it into Gamma. She then said, okay, this is what I want the thing. And this Gamma presentation within 60 seconds gave her a 15-page, beautiful equivalent of PowerPoint presentation with imagery, info, all the sources quoted. And she's like, it took me so long to find that information and you've just found it straight away. So Gamma for any sort of presentations. Perplexity is a huge favorite of mine for any form of deep research. It's probably one of the better deep research models on the market, and it will also prompt you other questions. And then my other favorite is Notebook LM. And actually, Jerry and I were talking about it yesterday. So Notebook LM is a RAG model, which means that it's grounded in the data you put into it. You put in, say, 15 documents of things that you were reading and interested in, but you actually haven't got time to read all 15 50-page documents. And you can ask it any questions and it will only look at that data. So it's not looking at everything else out on in the metaverse. It's literally just looking at the data you've put into it. And you can say, actually, I want you to give me a little podcast. So you'll then have a podcast of two people chatting about the information that you've put into it. And you can tailor that podcast. You can get it to do mind maps of the information. You can get it to write an article on the information, whatever it is that you want it to do, it will do it. So Notebook LM is another really, really good one that I use a lot. I'll probably talk too much about tools. So anyway, I'll just...
That's good. The reason I talked about Notebook, I used it for a coaching conversation where the coachee was okay with me recording. I recorded the conversation, put it into Notebook LM and asked it to give me tell me what I did well as a coach and tell me some improvements I could do. And it was really insightful. So, and it allowed me to put in an hour's worth of conversation, which ChatGPT wouldn't allow you to do. So it was good. So yeah, some really good tools and prompts. So just a question here. I recently had a very interesting discussion with a colleague on the use of AI in corporate directors and the business judgment rule. In most jurisdictions, there is a requirement to act with a duty of care, skill and diligence. How soon do you think it will become a legal requirement for board members to be really conversant with AI?
Oh, I think that's anybody's guess. I mean, the legislation is so different in every single country. So the EU's obviously got their AI Act, which is some really good strides towards that. The American legislation has sort of gone from being a more global one to a state level legislation. If you listen, Institute of Directors in New Zealand published a really great paper in, I think it was June or July last year, which is what you should be thinking about when you're governing AI. And they're doing regular AI governance webinars and training sessions. And I work with Board Pro and again, do a lot of AI training and training masterclasses, etc. on AI. So with any board, you can't necessarily mandate it. But again, going back to that KPMG survey, 40% of boards in that survey are saying they are revisiting who needs to be on their board. So that is a really high number, and they're saying they need at least one, if not two people who are really comfortable talking about AI, understand AI governance, understand the risks, so they can actually have people who can govern AI effectively on their board. So it might not be mandated, but you might very quickly find that if you are not conversant with AI, if you don't understand the terms, if you don't know what you're talking about, if your company even survives that, they will probably be looking for new board members, and you might suddenly find that you are no longer attracted to boards because you just don't have that skill set.
I suppose the challenge to that would be you'd rather the whole board builds their capability than rely on one person. It's a bit like having just the finance person on there, but yeah.
That is so true, and I can promise you that all the boards that I'm on, I've actually run the training sessions that I do for other
Yeah.
boards with all of my boards to make sure that we have all got. And AI is very definitely on the agenda. It's part of the risk register. It's on the tech, and that's actually a really important thing. Is from a governance framework, where does it sit on your board? Does it sit, it's a bit like a climate conversation, right? Does that sit at the main board, or has it been delegated to the audit and risk committee? With AI, I would suggest that it needs to be part of your AI. It depends how big your board is and what structures you've got. It needs to be part of your main board conversation, and you need to have that training at main board level so that you are all coherent and competent and can talk well about it and understand what the risks are. But if you are on a larger board, for example, one of the boards that I'm on, we've got it in the technology committee and in the people and culture committee, because actually it's not just the tech element of it, it's the how are we deploying that, how are we leading that change into the organization, and making sure that people are competent and comfortable with it all the way through the organization.
Yeah. Have you seen it used well in a risk for the risk, like critical risks and the top risks in the business situation, enterprise risk? Because if I think about risk management is not a precise science. It's it's someone saying how likely is this and what's the impact, and that's a judgment. And I know from research that you get 10 people and they'll give you 10 different you know options. So is that something that it could be used for in terms of, again, assessing the risks, looking at controls, looking at your strategies around addressing some of those areas?
It definitely can be. And one of the things that I always talk about AI being a co-pilot and a thought leader who's sitting alongside you. And so, for example, if you've got a strategic risk and you're thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure where that sits, you could get AI. And again, AI conversations are great. You just sort of say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Tell me some of the things that I might not have considered. But ultimately, being a director, it comes down to human judgment. So there are at least 3 boards that I know of that have actually got a robo director, which is actually an AI director on their board. So the Real Estate Institute in Australia has got a robo director, and they feed it all of the board papers and all of the information. And its role is to ask different questions and give a different lens. But from my perspective, I think the analogy that I would use is if you put a dice down on the table, then different directors could see different numbers on that dice, depending on what angle they're looking from. But there's always going to be that hidden piece underneath the dice that nobody can see. So actually, you can potentially use AI for yourself to maybe see different perspectives and angles that you wouldn't have necessarily considered, but also to uncover that what's underneath that we hadn't thought about. But ultimately, being on a board, you are responsible. You can't delegate that to your AI. So, yep, sure, get it to come up with some ideas and thoughts and different perspectives, but you're ultimately responsible for making that judgment about that risk as a board, and making that decision about, yep, we think it's likely and it's a catastrophe and we need to get some really great mitigants in place for it. And again, AI can potentially help you with some of the mitigants that you might want to put in place, but you need to own it and lead it. It's always a co-pilot, not the actual autopilot.
Yeah. And there's a question here which relates to something you said there. Once someone's put, do you upload board papers into ChatGTP for review
I
stroke
don't.
analysis?
No, I would never do that. I said there was an example of a company, and they are an AI company, and they use that as one of their examples. I don't put anything related to any of my boards into ChatGPT ever. The only thing I've got is a generic, uh, you're a director of a board in this industry, in this company, in this country, and then I will ask a generic question. So I don't put any of my board stuff ever into
Right.
AI.
So that example you gave there of the robo director feeding board paper,
Yes.
is that an
Oh, that one.
internal paid sort of?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's just, there's literally 3 organizations that I've come across so far. So there's like a whole big piece at the moment. And I actually did a webinar on it a couple of weeks ago with Board Pro on using AI even for your board minutes. And some companies are starting to do that. And again, I'm very much in the tread with caution. The Australian Institute of Directors just published a paper and legal opinion on that a couple of weeks ago. And it's very much AI potentially could break legal privilege. So if it's in the room with you and you've got AI listening to this legally privileged conversation, does that actually break that wall of legal privilege? And then the other thing is around the discoverability of the minutes afterwards, because your board minutes are meant to be a record of what was discussed and agreed, not the line by line of the conversation. And that might be that it's discoverable to go back to that recording and hear the exact conversation. So again, none of the boards that I'm on are we using AI for board minutes. And I know quite a few people who run company secretary companies. And again, they're not either, but then other people are starting to. So it's always a judgment call, but my advice is to make sure it's an informed decision, not just something you're walking into because someone suggested it and it's really cool and it's going to save me time. Great, but actually, what risks have you opened yourself up to? Like, there's the whole area of AI and risk is huge because we've talked about hallucinations, shadow AI, which is the amount of people in your organization who are using AI without you even knowing about it. So again, the KPMG numbers, last week, week before, KPMG and University of Melbourne did this big global study of use of AI, but they did a by country analysis as well. 57% of Kiwis are intentionally using AI at work, and a third of them are using AI in ways that contravene the policies and guidelines. It's 1 in 3 of your people. So that is really scary. And as an organization and as a board, if you've even got policies and guidelines, that's a great start. But if you've got them and then people 1 in 3 are saying, actually, we're using it in a way that we know doesn't actually fit with the guidelines, but it's really great. So that's one side of the risk. The other one is explainable AI. So if you're using AI within your organization and it's a black box, again, depending on the type of organization, that's another really significant risk. And as a board, you need to be talking to management and saying, we want that AI use inventory. We want to know where it's being used. We want to have visibility of that. You need to have a responsible AI policy, which is what is our data integrity? What's our fairness? Where is our human oversight? Where's our privacy? How are we making sure that we haven't got our people saying, I don't know, we're a retail outlet and we're closing 5 stores in key places, and they go pop that into ChatGPT to help them write a press brief. Well, that's suddenly now out and available for other people to look at. So and then there's another risk, which is actually your secret cyborgs, who are your people who are using AI all of the time, doing their job in 10% of the time, have got 90% of that time left over, and they're going, I'm just going to go and play on PlayStation if they're working from home, because as their boss, you feel like their work has been done and completed, but actually they're just using the company's time for something else. So there's a whole piece around risk. So, make sure it's in your risk register, make sure that you are mapping what those AI specific risks are, and you have a clear approach with management around where it's being used, how you're managing those risks, and what the mitigations are.
So those 57% of people in the organisation are using it, and obviously a third contravening.
Yeah.
Where do you start with? Because a policy can be, people. Where would they start with a policy? They can try ChatGPT maybe, but in terms of a policy can be something that's just in the files. How do you ensure that people are actually changing behaviour so that they're not contravening the rules? Is it about knowledge? That once people understand the policy, they go, "Oh, right, I didn't realise I couldn't do that," or are there other guardrails that need to be in place that,
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole load of guardrails that you need to put in place to sort of say what are the checks and balances? How are we making sure that people are operating within the policy? But also I often find that governance conversations, we always lean into the risk side of it, but don't forget the opportunity side of it. And that's why one of the boards that I'm on, this is part of the people and culture work stream as well, because we talk about how do we make sure that we've got people who are trained and understand what they shouldn't be doing, but are also leaning into what the opportunity is? And, it's really exciting. It's an incredible capability. It frees people up to do more interesting work. And so it's the making sure we've got the training in place. And, quite often the keynotes that I'll be doing is actually to that wider organization and saying, this is some of the fun stuff that you can do with it. These are the things you need to be sensible about, or a more deep one on how to use prompt engineering to get the right types of outputs. But really making sure that your people have that clarity, as you say, having that policy in place is just your starter for 10. And again, all the boards that I'm on, we've had an AI policy in place for at least 2.5 years, because it's something we're very well aware of, and we talk about it, but we also talk about where is that opportunity, where can we be using it differently, whether it's in marketing or HR or in customer experience. And the capability is so incredible now. So for example, if you are in an organization that's got SharePoint, you can actually just add SharePoint to a conversation and create it as your knowledge base. So your customer experience people on the front line can actually just have a conversation as a group, but SharePoint is part of it with the restricted files that they're allowed to see. It's not the whole organization's SharePoint, it's the ones that you've given them the authority to see. And suddenly they are, rather than having to try and find a piece of information, they've got that immediately accessible. And SharePoint will actually answer the question. It's part of agentic AI. We'll just answer the question and say, hey, we can do this for you. And here's the answer. And that product part here is actually, these are dimensions on it, or whatever it is they've asked. So there's so much opportunity. And again, if you're not using it and your competitors are, where are you missing out, and how long will you still be in business if you are not grabbing that opportunity?
So has anyone got any other questions relating to boards or executive teams around AI? Because just chuck them in the chat if you want to. There's someone's put here, you gave a great list of sub AI tools in your presentation. Is there a similar comprehensive list available to check out in my own time?
I can just send you a list, and you can send them out afterwards if you want.
Yeah, okay, we'll send that out with the, we'll send a note out after this with a summary of the conversation. So there's another question here. As people increasingly turn to AI tools for mental health support, recently on the news, informal counselling or coaching, should organisations reconsider the role of traditional employee assistance programs, EAPs, and mentorship stroke coaching? What new possibilities could AI offer, and what boundaries should be in place to ensure they complement rather than replace human connection and professional care? Any views on potential implications on organisational culture? Well, that's a large question.
That's a fantastic question.
Right,
and I'm going to say proceed with caution. So yes, Harvard Business Review just in about 4 or 5 weeks ago just published these are the main things that people are using AI for, and actually that mental health piece was right up at the top. So it is increasingly becoming an area, and there are a lot of really good I'm calling it an app. It's not really an app, but there are a lot of AIs out there that focus on mental health. But there's also some really nasty horror stories of people considering suicide and the app actually encouraging that. A lot of people have closed them down. There's been some really nasty stories. The other really, and I'm saying this particularly as a female, is if you think about the data that all of AI is trained on, it's the history of the internet, right? And all of the books and everything that's out there in the world. And historically, there is a very male bias on that, and there's a very Western bias on that. And there's probably some religious biases in that. And so when you're thinking about the training data that has gone into the sort of the global large language model, it can have very clear biases. And I, again, have read some really awful stuff about, particularly for females, the type of advice that it is giving. So I don't think I would be looking at it to replace my EAP program where you've got a qualified counsellor. I think if it's a sort of a first tier of support and you're going, hey, if you get this amount of conversation, but then it can flag and refer to somebody who is a professional. Most mental health issues are complex and difficult, and it can probably do something superficial, but I would be, again, with my risk hat on as a director, I would be very, very nervous about delegating that health, safety and well-being responsibility to an unproven AI that I know has got biases and doesn't always deliver the right outputs. So
Yeah.
proceed with great caution would be
Yeah,
my comment
I
on
think
that.
I'd agree with that. In terms of from a coaching leaders, do you think there's an opportunity around anonymously saying, I've got this situation in my team or with this
Oh,
person,
totally.
what are my options to sort of go through? So you can not put anything confidential, but
Yeah.
you can actually a what if scenario.
Totally. I mean, that's a great way of using it. But again, go back to Copilot rather than autopilot, right? Apply your human judgment lens over the top. So I can give an example of something I've had. Somebody on one of the exec teams of one of the boards that I work on was very ill, and obviously well way past sick leave and everything else. And I actually went back and I said to ChatGPT, look, this is the situation with no details. These are the things I've done. What have I missed? And it's like, this. And I'm like, okay, good. I got most of the stuff, but I didn't think to do that piece. And that was actually really helpful. Again, in a coaching conversation, if you've got someone who you know has got a particular concern or issue about something and you're not an expert on it, you can just I often have it on in the car, and I'll just literally have a conversation in the car about, hey, talk to me about this. And it will just give me some thoughts and frameworks to discuss. I just saw a question pop up about boards and AI, but I didn't catch the bottom of it. So I've deliberately not got the questions on my screen because I get too distracted by them. So I'll let Jerry read that one back.
Well, there's a couple of questions that have come through. One is around AI policy, that things are moving so fast. Are
Yeah.
you going to be constantly updating your policy, or is it more about the frameworks for the policy as opposed to the content?
It's absolutely, you need to have your policy that is generic enough to cover most instances, that is and flexible, but is also detailed enough to make sure you've got the guidelines and guardrails in place. But with any good policy at a board, you're reviewing it at least annually, right? So you're just going in and checking and saying, is this still fit for purpose? So
the other one is around, should we be insisting management develop an AI strategy for the organisation? I suppose the corollary or the other part of this is, or should AI be used to help develop the strategy rather than being a strategy in itself? So
I think AI needs to be part of your strategic roadmap. So in some cases, I don't think I would want AI writing the strategy because it will come up with a cookie cutter for everybody. But one of the things you can do, which is fantastic. So one of the things that I talk about AI being an assistant where it can just help you out with stuff. It can be a creator where it's starting from a blank sheet of paper and creating something for you, but actually as a strategist as well. So, for example, if you're thinking about your strategy, you can say to AI, act as looking at a particular strategic framework, whether it's a Deloitte model or a Bain model or KPMG model or something. If you've got a strategic framework that you particularly like, or in fact, I was reading something yesterday about someone saying they're actually getting AI to run the strategy workshop for them. So within a organizational AI framework, and the voice mode of AI, they're actually they're putting in all the information they want, the framework of the discussion, how they want it to work, and then they're actually getting AI to facilitate that workshop. So they're actually having the conversations, and then they very quickly forget AI is in the room, but it keeps them on track and does the conversation. So very cool. I haven't played with that yet, but I'm now going to, having read it yesterday. But AI should definitely be part of your roadmap and strategy. And if it isn't, you are unfortunately leading into an area of losing the battle. You need to have AI on your risk framework. You need to be thinking about data ethics. You need to be compliant. Yeah, you need to be thinking about regulation. You need to be thinking about hallucinations. You need to be thinking about shadow AI. So there's a whole lot of things that you need to be thinking about. What's the strategic opportunity? What's the strategic risk? And as a board, I'm very happy to come in and I do training on, it's basically framed around the IOD pillars of AI frameworks. But I'm very happy to come in and do training for your board and actually help you go, this is how we take the first steps in this. We get to this core level of education, and then we can go from there.
Sounds good. Someone's put in the chat, awesome fireside chat. What's the presenter's professional background? So finance,
Okay, super quickly, previous exec roles. Actually, I started my AI career. I actually did part of my degree in computing back in the 80s. And my first job out of uni was a software installer and trainer. Then I went off and did a million things in marketing, sales, customer experience, customer operations. Final roles were things like customer operations director at Vodafone, on the SLT at Air New Zealand, at Westpac, BNZ, Lotto. So yeah, I've done a whole load of big exec roles. And yeah, now in governance. So I sit on a number of boards and chair one, and yeah,
right,
and run my own companies. So,
and final question: if let's say it's not on the agenda of a board,
yep.
What's the first 3 steps? If I'm a director here, tell me where I start. What should I do first? What's next?
Okay, I'm going to give you 4 steps. So the first one is get an external person in to brief your board on AI and what they need to be thinking about and what they need to know. The second one is get your management team to give you a short form report on, which is basically a board AI briefing, saying where's it in use, what risks have we got, what are the opportunities, what are our current controls. The third one is for your board, figure out what your ownership is sitting like. So your oversight ownership is sitting like. So whether you've got an AI director who could lean onto this, or have a subcommittee or a working group or something. And then obviously the other one is making sure that you've got an AI policy, which covers ethics, accountability, explainability, privacy, training plans, blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot that you need to do, but from the get-go, those 4 things, get some help, make sure that management is all across this and is giving you a briefing on it, get some oversight formally into the board structure, and get an AI policy in there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Helen. So just some of the things I got out of it. So obviously a third of people don't have it on their agenda at the moment. Yep. So that's a big opportunity. Your employees are using it. So over half of your employees are actually using it, and a third of that number are using it in a detrimental way that could be impacting your business. I think anyone can start with AI. So I would probably be the old white guy on, potentially on a board. So, and I'm learning every day. So if I can learn, then anyone can learn. And I think the other thing I took out is this isn't owned by the IT department. This should be owned by the board and the executive team. I think it's an opportunity to learn together, I would say. And I would say the other thing I think I've heard from you is a little and often approach. So it's continually evolving. Don't put your minutes into ChatGPT. Use things that are locked and loaded. So things like Copilot, which obviously only has your information. There's lots of other tools that you've talked about. Notebook.lm.google. Obviously, ChatGPT, you can talk to it as well. So if you want to have a conversation with it, it will do that as well. That's quite useful. Setting up different personas for different, whether it's different boards or it could be different people at a board. Do you want a different angle on the conversation? I think that's a great idea to, again, bring that a bit more diversity of thought. The prompt engineering, I think you talked about, is detailed as possible. A question will give you more. And yeah, start with an external person. So get someone in to start upskilling the board. Get the management team involved in terms of understanding where the risks, opportunities, controls. Have ownership at the board, and make sure you've got a policy in place that's broad enough. So I think that hopefully wraps everything up. It's been a great conversation, Helen. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to know more, then we'll send out a note after this. We'll have details for Helen if you want to contact Helen. If you want to know more about Governance 365 and need some help there to uncover your blind spots, IT and digital is one of the 10 areas, but we've got 9 others, then please contact me. Our next webinar is with Roger Gray, Ports of Auckland CEO, which is covering the turnaround in health and safety culture there and the role the CEO and the board played. So I'd love to have you join me again for that. So thanks, Helen. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
See you on.